Good morning. I'm Robin Citizen, the Director of Festival Programming and Cinematheque here at TIFF, and I'm really happy to be moderating this press conference for The Good Nurse today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Thank you to our media partner, Twitter. We're so excited to be live streaming this Q&A at TIFF_industry. As a reminder, no photography or filming of any kind. All of our questions have been submitted in advance. Tobias Lindholm, longtime Thomas Vinterberg co-writer, teams with Jessica Chastain for his first American feature as director, a thriller centered in the world of hospitals and healthcare and based on one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Amy Loughran. Christy Wilson Cairns, the writer. Eddie Redmayne. Jessica Chastain. And Tobias Lindholm. Thanks for joining us. Tobias, what inspired you to tell this story as your first American feature?
When I was sent Christie's wonderful first draft of the story, and I read Charles Graeber's book, The Good Nurse, I realized that on the surface we had a story that was a very thrilling serial killer story, and then underneath there was a big pounding heart of humanity. And looking at it, I don't think true crime is a genre. It's like a hollow darkness. And it's our job as storytellers to fill humanity, or at least a good reason to tell stories in there. And the story about Amy was that reason in this case. And I felt that portraying a female, real-life superhero who went through so much and became an example to us all that what we do in our societies matters was an important story to tell.
How does it feel to see these harrowing events brought to the big screen, Amy?
Well, it didn't feel very harrowing when I was going through it. So watching Jessica play this gentle side of me, I was able to create a space for myself where I was finally proud of myself. And it was, of course, it was terrifying going through it, but watching Jessica, I then finally was able to be proud. And I guess I didn't realize how gentle I was because I'm such a badass. And yes, and there's no other badass I'd rather play me than Jessica. But Eddie definitely nailed it. Chills, chills, chills. He became Charles Cullen. He became my friend Charlie. It was crazy.
You say it wasn't always harrowing when you were living it, but in the film, Jessica, there's so many little moments of realization you can see kind of on your face, and you trying to fight it. Did you work together to kind of talk about what those moments were and how you can externalize them in your performance?
We definitely talked, and I got so much from Amy, and a lot. It's interesting because I got a lot about the gentle side, a lot about being a mom and a single mom and the sacrifices she made, and something that really stuck with me is she talked about she was a night nurse, so her kids thought she was a stay-at-home mom. So it was really this kind of like, anything she could do to take care of others, and I think it's interesting, actually, to hear you say that being proud of yourself. It actually makes me quite emotional because one of the first conversations we had, I said, "Wow, you're an incredible human being, and what you've done, I'm so honored to talk to you." And her first response was, "Anyone would do it." And I thought also that told me so much about who she was as well. And so I know you say it wasn't harrowing, but you also say anyone would do it. And I think it kind of underplays the incredible act that you did, because it's clear that you saved a lot of lives.
Thanks, Jessica.
Christy, can you talk a bit about the writing process of kind of translating this incredible story to a screenplay?
Well, I mean, I had the privilege of Charles Graeber's incredible book, and then I also had Charles Graeber, who had, just mountains of research, and he introduced me to Amy, and you very kindly gave me that huge amount of time, and now, 10 years of friendship. But having access to people and having them be honest with you and tell you about the amazing things they've did, but also their fears, is just such a blessing as a writer. And then it was just my job to do the best possible, kind of script I could, so that these amazing people could realize it.
Eddie, Amy says that you nailed this portrayal. So in studying how to inhabit Charles, what were some of the challenges and some of the pulls that attracted you to this role?
Firstly, thank you, Amy. That means a huge amount. I think whenever you play someone, a real person, which both Jessica and I have done a couple of times, you start by allowing yourself the relief of knowing that it's not a documentary, it's not going to be a facsimile, and you're never going to get it right. And one of the wonderful things about making this film and working with Jess is we actually have quite similar processes. So as everyone here has spoken about, we had this phenomenal resource that was Charles Graeber's book, which was like a Bible for an actor, in that it had a huge biography of Charlie's life, but whole sections that aren't seen in the film, which of course is doing a lot of your homework for you. But also I got to speak to Amy, and Amy talked of his kindness, his gentleness, his humor, his sort of the fact that he would always be self-deprecating, and he would always, as a way of, and it was funny that his life was a total fucking nightmare. He would use it in his wife and his ex-wife, and so that was very helpful. But also, you told me that the only time you saw the murderer was that time when you were mic'd, and both Amy and Charles describe. And then in the script, describe that Charlie's one eye, almost disattaches from the other and drifts off in this thing. And there was a moment, and it was very clearly very specific. And I spent about sort of 10 minutes trying that in the mirror. I realised that wasn't going to happen. So I realised that I was going to have to. I couldn't. That was not going to be very useful. So I realised that was another moment of realising that I was never going to get it quite right, but I could. But then I worked with a wonderful a dialect coach, a guy called Michael Buster, and a wonderful dancer. I worked with a woman called Alexandra Reynolds, and we worked a bit on his very specific physicality. And then Jess and I went to nurse school, and Jess is a really good nurse, and I'm a useless nurse. I would have to come in early on the days that we were filming to try and kind of go over the routines of the stuff. And whenever we did a take, we'd of course you want to please your director, and you're sort of looking to what to be as things. But then Joe, the nurse, who was there every day, you'd also be like, how'd I do? And he's like, no, they would have died. That would not work. So
Jessica's form on the compressions when you were doing CPR.
Really jealous? Really jealous.
So if there's a medical emergency, we are going to call you, Jessica. Charlie and Amy, they find each other when Amy's having a pretty rough time in her life, and you can see that the bond is immediate, like you're holding on to each other. So how did you work together to build that rapport, which is so clear on screen?
It was really hard because Eddie Redmayne, man. I think, we started from a place of really liking each other, and it's an interesting thing in this industry because we had mostly hung out on the James Corden show or presenting at the Golden Globes.
We met on a couch of a talk show.
And, which is so strange. But I'd always been a big admirer of Eddie and his work, and also Eddie as a person. And so when this project showed up and Tobias mentioned that he would like Eddie to play Charles, it really felt something that was going to be very special, and also how I felt about him as a person. I liked him so much. I thought, oh, that's going to be really easy to use, because the thing I loved so much about the film is we see so oftentimes something about a serial killer or a story that's like fetishized, you know? You see this sense like you'd see him injecting the bags, and it's like there's a way, I've always felt a little, I don't know, dirty watching that stuff. You know, I don't want to like celebrate, or not celebrate, but just have this almost, I don't know. I don't want the media to glorify what happened to another human being. And I want to celebrate the humanity, and that's why I was very excited about this and celebrating Amy. And the idea that at the end she reminds him that he's human, and that's what gets him to talk again, because so many people were making him feel like a monster, and she saw the human being. That also, I knew with Eddie, it was just going to be so easy, that for me.
Tobias, this film has been in development since 2018, and I'm sure there were some challenges shooting because of COVID. Can you talk a little bit about that production?
So we developed for a long time, and the crazy thing, and this never happens, was that we had planned to do this 2 years earlier than we did. Then some stuff happened, and we didn't. And then we ended up regrouping 2 years later, like waiting those 2 years, knowing that we wanted to do this together, and that's very unusual. So the intimacy of that and the friendship that was built over those years, Christy and I were Skyping from my office in Copenhagen and her office in different places in London. It was that long time that you actually moved several times doing it. Build the friendships that we needed on set. We were making a film, we knew about endless darkness in a very dark time. The only thing that me and the producers could offer was to try to create an environment where people were friendly, where there was kindness, where we were able to relax together. And the fun thing that happened with the masks, of course, for me, English is not my first language. I was wearing a mask directing these great actors and trying to express what I wanted. I'm thinking Danish and translating through a mask, and it felt once in a while stressful. But it also gave us an intimacy because there weren't allowed that many people on set. So there was not that many elements that could steal our attention. Even though we were wearing masks and sitting there, we were very closely together, just making these scenes in kind of quietness and having fun with it. And in that way, COVID became a very weird blessing. And then we did have Tequila Fridays in Jessica's trailer, and the idea was that on week 1 we would do 1 tequila, on week 2 we would, you know, and since it was a 10-week shoot.
Another round.
This is for Jessica, Amy, and Christy. So in film adaptations of true stories, there are a lot of real-life moments that don't make the cut into the final film. So what was the collaboration process between you in figuring out, you know, what was going to stay in and what would be left out?
I mean, in the very beginning, I just wanted to make Amy feel real. And like you say, you know, a lot of superheroes are billionaires in batsuits. They're not single moms. And I'm the child of a single mom, and I watched her be a superhero all the time. And I really wanted to see that on screen. You know, she's done something extraordinary. We can all be billionaires in batsuits, but we can aspire to be like her, which is, you know, I think a very worthy aspiration. So really what I wanted to capture was her humanity, these tremendous feats. And then when Tobias, you know, and I were working on the script, it was always drilling into that. And then we really drilled into Charlie's humanity and really made him feel like a human being as well. And that's when the sort of doors came off and we really understood it. And then, I mean, we had lovely times in rehearsals. Obviously, it's very nice working with Jessica Chastain. It's not a hard day. And you know, anything that I write, you can deliver 10 times better and make me look good. So it was just a case of just always trying to preserve her character. And we all wanted that. You wanted that, I wanted that, and you were the true guardian of it. So yeah, it was a blessing.
I think the one thing that was missing is that I curse a lot more than Jessica did. You know, drop an F-bomb here and there. It would have been more real, but yeah. I mean, I'm a trauma nurse. That's what we do.
It was a rating issue.
Yeah, it was.
There are so many difficult scenes in this film, and a lot of traumatic things happen to the characters. Were there any scenes that were particularly challenging to film for you as the director, but then also the cast? And I'm thinking of one of the scenes where Charles' mask finally drops, and he just says, I can't," over and over again, and it's quite a startling, reveal. Any scenes that were really challenging to shoot?
Sometimes it's the most simple scenes that are the most difficult to shoot. But lucky me, Eddie and Jessica are so brilliant. So I've never before been in the editing room and only have qualified material to work with. So thank you. I think the most difficult scenes to shoot was the one involving the patients that the victims, and how we could, the scene where Charles is washing and getting the body of Anna Martinez ready was emotionally a really, really hard scene to do, because we wanted to do two things. We wanted to portray with dignity a dead human being who had been dehumanized. We also wanted that scene to be the first glimpse into the darkness of Charlie. It's the first time where we reveal what could be going on. And to find the balance to not be too fascinated with the darkness and protect the humanity of the scene was for me the hardest balance. The I Can't scene was an extremely, for me, fun scene to shoot. Of course, it was extremely serious, but it was, one person, and I love these things. I mean, it's like going to film school again. It's one room, one person, one table, and then just the energy in the room. And that Eddie pulled that off was pretty amazing. There was a lot of stuff going on, and we hadn't really talked about, as I remember it, exactly how we wanted to do it. We knew that this needed to be the scene where he could unleash the beast. But you had not revealed to me how you wanted to do it. I wanted to throw a couple of obstacles in there, so we ended up, I think, without Eddie's knowledge, as we approached the day, to put him in a handcuff to the table with just one hand, which defined a space that Eddie could take control of. And then I could just basically sit for 11 hours by the monitor and look at this master at work.
It was an interesting moment, because some of that scene was taken verbatim from the Charlie's cross-examination. But also there was a moment in the trial that happened later, when a lot of the families were there, and Charlie was the judge was talking to him, and he stood up in court and started shouting a mantra against the judge about the judge's incompetence, I think it was, and he just shouted and shouted and repeated it and repeated it and repeated it, and he ended up having to be gagged and bound in court. And obviously we weren't having that scene in the film, but this sort of, I don't want to speak because obviously, but this other version of him, this other character, which Amy describes as being disassociated, there was a great arrogance there and a total belief. And so that scene for me, when we were playing it, Tobias kept me away from Nnamdi and Noah during filming, and it was really about trying to retain power. And so as they were starting to do the cross-examination, I heard that noise of the smashing, and I just kept doing it to sort of piss Noah off. And then gradually it built into something more rhythmic.
I remember in film school, I read the story about John Cassavetes in doing Woman Under the Influence. He suddenly had to stop shooting, and I mean, one of the big American heroes, right? And then they would be shooting, and then suddenly he would stop everything. It was, Gina, come back, right? Like he was afraid that she had left because it felt so real. And that day, I remember coming in at one point, and I must have looked very worried at you. and you were smashing your hand again and again down to that table with that handcuff, and I was afraid that you were hurting yourself. And again, I didn't want to take the energy out of it but I looked at you, and you looked up, and then you just smiled. And you nodded. I was like, right, I'll go in again. And it felt like that moment for me, at least. He's still sane. He's still there. It's just great, great acting.
Jessica, you're a great friend of TIFF. You've been here quite a few times. And how does it feel to bring this film to this specific audience?
I love the audiences at TIFF. I just find it, I love to see movies here too. I love to premiere films here, but then also the night before, Eddie and I went to another premiere, and just to sit in the audience, and it's filled with film lovers, and there's a sense of excitement and community at this festival that, I love film festivals because I am, a bit of a film nerd. But there's something about this festival that feels so open and loving and connected that is really exciting for me. And so I love to be here. I love to bring my films here. I also love to be in the audience and watch films here.
As a follow-up to that, Tobias, what made you want to bring this film to TIFF, this filmmaker?
So exactly 10 years ago, I brought my first Danish feature as a solo director, a hijacking here. Thank you. And it was the first time where I, left Denmark and brought this little Danish film out to the world and shared it. And it was such a great experience. So to be able 10 years later and 10 pounds heavier to go to Toronto again now with my first American feature and present that to the same audience is a great, great joy. I'm extremely proud and happy to be here, and I consider Toronto Film Festival one of the greatest in the world. So it's a big, big pleasure.
Amy, Nnamdi and Noah aren't here. They portrayed the police officers who were looking at the case. But how did you communicate kind of that process to Christy? And I know there's the book as well, but the interactions between the kind of healthcare bureaucracy and the police was really interesting. So how did that come about?
Tim and Danny are my brothers now. When we created that team to not only put a serial killer behind bars, but went up against such a big corporation, because that's what hospitals are now, we all knew what we were up against. I found that I was such a small piece of that ensemble. They had to live it day in, day out, 24 hours a day. And I at least got to go home. They never put down that investigation. And I always felt protected, always felt protected. And I think that that's what I had said to Nnamdi and Noah, is how, first and foremost, they protected me. And it was why Charlie ended up being captured, is because of their protection of me. And I always felt safe with them. I always felt like what I was doing was always going to be supported. And for years and years, no one knew about me. They would not give out my name. I was a CI in the paperwork. And if it wasn't for Charles Graeber and his investigative spidey senses, none of us would really be here. So yeah, when I saw Nnamdi and Noah on screen, I really felt like they captured the essence of who Tim and Danny were. And just watching them interact with Jessica, I did feel that protective nature that they are in real life.
Tobias, some of the aspects seen in the film, particularly the American healthcare bureaucracies that kind of kept, I'm American, I feel like I can say this with impunity, that kept Charles kind of being able to have access to people for so long. They do feel uniquely American, but what do you think makes this film universal despite these kind of systemic specificities?
Well, I think it is universal because we, even though I live in a very privileged, small 5.6 million people in a very isolated, protected geographic place in the world, we still have systemic problems. We still see how systems over time takes control from the individuals, and that in itself is a dehumanizing process. And I think that any system we are part of is only working when individuals live up to the responsibility, and that makes this story universal, and that's the symbol that Amy lived, is that it matters what you do, and that the individual is king in any system.
Amy, I think we have time for one more question. The compassion that you confronted Charles with at the end is kind of what finally got him to confess. After all that had happened, that you had witnessed, kind of where were you able to mine that within yourself to kind of extend to him?
It was interesting watching Jessica get past her fear of Charlie, and that is really what I had to do as well. I went back to looking at him as my friend. He had saved my life, and he had my back all the time. And that's where I had to go back to. I had to go back to who we were as friends, because we really did have a love for each other. I didn't know the murderer. I met the murderer a couple of times. The murderer was, to me, a different person. I believe that he disassociated into that other personality. So I wasn't talking to the murderer. I was talking to my friend Charlie at the end. And I saw Jessica do that as well. And the scene where she puts the sweater on him, that's real. That really happened. And throughout Charlie's confession, the real confession, he actually has my sweater draped over him. And, you know, what a beautiful symbol of my friendship, being able to be there, to keep him warm, to be able to at least hold on to that last piece of humanity.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you, Tobias, Jessica, Eddie, and Christy for bringing this film to TIFF and discussing it with us. Thanks.